So it's been many years that my brother and I have been researching end time prophecy, even before we realized that we were the true Hebrew Israelites of the Bible. And an interesting document was revealed around 1905, and it's a conspiracy to rule the world. And it's written in the context of Zionist Jews. And so I realize some of you guys may not be familiar with this, so I'm going to share it. It's going to probably take a few more episodes to complete the entire book or publication. Okay, so you'll find this very interesting because a lot of things that are going on today is written in this publication. Okay, so they documented their conspiracy to overthrow the world, the arrogance, right, the high-mindedness. If you all understood what was going on, you probably couldn't sleep at night. Okay, but let's begin. Of the protocols themselves, little needs to be said in the way of introduction. The book in which they are embodied was published by Sergei Nilus in Russia in 1905. A copy of this is in the British Museum, bearing the date of its reception, August 10, 1906. All copies that were known to exist in Russia were destroyed in the Kerensky regime, and under their successors, the possession of a copy by anyone in Soviet land was a crime sufficient to ensure the owners of being shot on sight. The fact is, in itself, sufficient proof of the genuineness of the protocols. The Jewish journals, of course, say that they are a forgery, leaving it to be understood that Professor Nilus, who embodied them in a work of his own, had concocted them for his own purposes. Mr. Henry Ford, in an interview published in the New York World, February 17, 1921, put the case for Nilus tersely and convincingly thus: "The only statement I care to make about the protocols is that they fit in with what is going on. They are 16 years old, and they have fitted the world situation up to this time. They fit it now. Indeed, they do." And to let you know, Israel, it fits to this very day. The plan, the plot, the conspiracy that's written in the protocols continues to this day. The word protocol signifies a precise gummed on to the front of a document, a draft of a document, minutes of proceedings. In this instance, protocol means minutes of the proceedings of the meetings of the learned elders of Zion, or better yet, Khazars. These protocols give the substance of addresses delivered to the innermost circle of the rulers of Zion. They reveal the converted plan of action of the Jewish nation developed through the ages and edited by the elders themselves up to date. Parts and summaries of the plan have been published from time to time during the centuries as the secrets of the elders have leaked. The claim of the Jews that the protocols are forgeries is in itself an admission of their genuineness, for they never attempt to answer the facts corresponding to the threats which the protocols contain. And indeed, the correspondence between prophecy and fulfillment is too glaring to be set aside or obscured. This the Jews well know and therefore evade. The presumption is strong that the protocols were issued or reissued at the first Zionist Congress held at Basel in 1897 under the presidency of the father of modern Zionism, the late Theodor Herzl. There has been recently published a volume of Herzl's diaries, a translation of some passages which appeared in the Jewish Chronicles in July 14, 1922. Herzl gives an account of his first visit to England in 1895 and his conversation with Colonel Goldsmid, a Jew or Khazarian brought up as a Christian, an officer in the English army, and at heart a Jew nationalist all the time. Goldsmid suggested to Herzl that the best way to expropriate the English aristocracy, and so destroying their power to protect the people of England against Jew dominion, was to put excessive taxes on the land. Herzl thought this an excellent idea, and it is now to be found definitely embodied in Protocol number 6. The above extract from Herzl's diary is an extremely significant bit of evidence bearing on the existence of the Jew world plot and authenticity of the protocols. But any reader of the Intelligence will be able, from his own knowledge of recent history and from his own experience, to confirm the genuineness of every line of them. And it is in the light of this living comment that all readers are invited to study Mr. Marsden's translation of this terribly inhuman document. And here is another very significant circumstance. So that's one thing I want you guys to understand, is that when you read this, you're going to say, hey, this has been going on since I've been around. I think it's been going on since my parents have been around. I think this document is legit because it's happening, right? So that proves the validity of the document. And you also got to ask yourself, well, who's in control of the world system today? That reaffirms this document's authenticity. The present successor of Herzl as leader of the Zionist movement, Dr. Weizmann, quoted one of these sayings at the send-off banquet given to Chief Rabbi Hertz on October 6, 1920. The Chief Rabbi was on the point of leaving for his empire tour of HRH, the Prince of Wales, and this is the saying of the sages which Dr. Weizmann quoted: a beneficent protection which God has instituted in the life of the Jew is that he has dispersed him all over the world. Now compare this with the last clause of but one of the Protocol 11. God has granted to us, his chosen people, the gift of dispersion, and from this, which appears to all eyes to be our weakness, has come forth all our strength, which has now brought us to the threshold of sovereignty over all the world. The remarkable correspondence between these passages proves several things. It proves that the learned elders exist. It proves that Dr. Weizmann knows all about them. It proves that the desire for a national home in Palestine is only camouflage and an infinitesimal part of the Jews' real objective. It proves that the Jews of the world have no intention of settling in Palestine or any separate country, and that their annual prayer that they may all meet next year in Jerusalem is merely a piece of their characteristic make-believe. It also demonstrates that the Jews are now a world menace, and that the Aryan races will have to domicile them permanently out of Europe. Okay, so we're going to stop there, and we're going to begin reading the actual protocols themselves. Okay. Protocols of the meetings of the learned elders of Zion. Protocol number 1. Putting aside fine phrases, we shall speak of the significance of each thought. By comparisons and deductions, we shall throw light upon surrounding facts. What I am about to set forth, then, is our system from the 2 points of view, that of ourselves and that of the Goyim. It must be noted that men with bad instincts are more in number than the good, and therefore the best results in governing them are attained by violence and terrorization and not by academic discussions. Every man aims at power. Everyone would like to become a dictator if only he could. And rare indeed are the men who would not be willing to sacrifice the welfare of all for the sake of securing their own welfare. What has restrained the beasts of prey, who are called men, what has served for their guidance hitherto. In the beginnings of the structure of society, they were subjected to brutal and blind force, afterwards to law, which is the same force only disguised. I draw the conclusion that by the law of nature right lies in force. Political freedom is an idea, but not a fact. This idea one must know how to apply whenever it appears necessary with this bait of an idea to attract the masses of the people to one's party for the purpose of crushing another who is in authority. This task is rendered easier if the opponent has himself been infected with the idea of freedom, so-called liberalism, and for the sake of an idea is willing to yield some of his power. It is precisely here that the triumph of our theory appears. The slackened reins of government are immediately, by the law of life, caught up and gathered together by a new hand, because the blind might of the nation cannot for one single day exist without guidance, and the new authority merely fits into the place of the old already weakened by liberalism. Gold. In our day, the power which has replaced that of the rulers who were liberal is the power of gold. Time was when faith ruled. The idea of freedom is impossible of realization because no one knows how to use it with moderation. It is enough to hand over a people to self-government for a certain length of time for that people to be turned into a disorganized mob. From that moment on, we get internecine strife, which soon develops into battles between classes, in the midst of which states burn down and their importance is reduced to that of a heap of ashes. Whether a state exhausts itself in its own convulsions, whether its internal discord brings it under the power of external foes, in any case, it can be accounted irretrievable lost. It is in our power. The despotism of capital, which is entirely in our hands, reaches out to it a straw that the state willy-nilly must take hold of. If not, it goes to the bottom. Should anyone of a liberal mind say that such reflections as the above are immoral, I will put the following questions. If every state has two foes, and if in regard to the external foe it is allowed and not considered immoral to use every manner and art of conflict, as for example to keep the enemy in ignorance of plans of attack and defense, to attack him by night or in superior numbers, then in what way can the same means in regard to a worse foe, the destroyer of the structure of society and the commonwealth, be called immoral and not permissible? Is it possible for any sound logical mind to hope with any success to guide crowds by the aid of reasonable counsels and arguments when any objection or contradiction, senseless though it may be, can be made, and when such objection may find more favor with the people whose powers of the reasoning are superficial? Men in masses and the men of the masses being guided solely by petty passions, paltry beliefs, traditions, and sentimental theorems, fall a prey to party dissension, which hinders any kind of agreement, even on the basis of a perfectly reasonable argument. Every resolution of a crowd depends upon a chance or packed majority, which in its ignorance of political secrets put forth some ridiculous resolution that lays in the administration a seed of anarchy. The political has nothing in common with the moral. The ruler who is governed by the moral is not a skilled politician, and is therefore unstable on his throne. He who wishes to rule must have recourse both to cunning and to make-believe. Great national qualities like frankness and honesty are vices in politics, for they bring down rulers from their thrones more effectively and more certainly than the most powerful enemy. Such qualities must be the attributes of the kingdoms of the Goyim, but we must in no wise be guided by them. Esau is plotting, as he always does. Might is right. And this is why true Israel is in captivity. We don't understand how they think, right? Their God is Satan. So let's continue. Might is right. Our right lies in force. The word right is an abstract thought and proved by nothing. The word means no more than give me what I want in order that thereby I may have a proof that I am stronger than you. Where does right begin? Where does it end? So if you don't believe in God, you don't believe in right and wrong. But they are literally at war with the Most High. They know that. But all of them don't, but the elite do. The top 1% ruling class do. In any state in which there is a bad organization of authority and impersonality of laws and of the rulers who have lost their personality amid the flood of rights ever multiplying out of liberalism, I find a new right, to attack by the right of the strong, and to scatter to the winds all existing forces of order and regulation, to reconstruct all institutions, and to become the sovereign lord of those who have left to us the right of their power by laying them down voluntarily in their liberalism. So if you're liberal trying to get rights for everyone, you're handing it over to them. You're handing over power to them. So they say. Our power in the present tottering condition of all forms of power will be more invincible than any other, because it will remain invisible until the moment when it has gained such strength that no cunning can any longer undermine it. Out of the temporary evil we are now compelled to commit will emerge the good of an unshakable rule, which will restore the regular course of the machinery of the national life, brought to naught by liberalism. The result justifies the means. Let us, however, in our plans direct our attention not so much to what is good and moral as to what is necessary and useful. Before us is a plan in which is laid down strategically the line from which we cannot deviate without running the risk of seeing the labor of many centuries brought to naught. In order to elaborate satisfactory forms of action, it is necessary to have regard to the rascality, the slackness, the instability of the mob, its lack of capacity to understand and respect the conditions of its own life or its own welfare. It must be understood that the might of a mob is blind, senseless, and unreasoning force ever at the mercy of a suggestion from any side. The blind cannot lead the blind without bringing them into the abyss. Consequently, members of the mob, upstarts from the people, even though they should be as a genius for wisdom, yet having no understanding of the political, cannot come forward as leaders of the mob without bringing the whole nation to ruin. Only one trained from childhood for independent rule can have understanding of the words that can be made up of the political alphabet. A people left to itself, i.e., to upstarts from its midst, brings itself to ruin by party dissensions, excited by the pursuit of power and honors, and the disorders arising therefrom. Is it possible for the masses of the people calmly and without petty jealousies to form judgment, to deal with the affairs of the country, which cannot be mixed up with personal interests? Can they defend themselves from an external foe? It is unthinkable. For a plan broken up into as many parts as there are heads in the mob loses all homogeneity and thereby becomes unintelligible and impossible of execution. We are despots. It is only with a despotic ruler that plans can be elaborated extensively and clearly in such a way as to distribute the whole properly among the several parts of the machinery of the state. From this conclusion, it is inevitable that a satisfactory form of government for any country is one that concentrates in the hands of one responsible person. Without an absolute despotism, there can be no existence for civilization, which is carried on not by the masses, but by their guide, whosoever that person may be. The mob is savage, and displays its savagery at every opportunity. The moment the mob seizes freedom in its hands, it quickly turns to anarchy, which in itself is the highest degree of savagery. Behold, the alcoholic animals, bemused with drink, the right to an immoderate use of which comes along with freedom. It is not for us and ours to walk with road. The peoples of the Goyim are bemused with alcoholic liquors. Their youth has grown stupid on classism and from early immorality into which it has been inducted by our special agents, by tutors, lackeys, governess in the houses of the wealthy, by clerks and others, by our women in the places of dispensation frequented by the Goyim. In the number of these last, I count also the so-called society ladies, voluntary followers of the others in corruption and luxury. Our countersign is force and make-believe. Only force conquers in political affairs, especially if it be concealed in the talents essential to statesmen. Violence must be the principle, and cunning and make-believe the rule for governments which do not want to lay down their crowns at the feet of agents of some new power. This evil is the one and only means to attain the end, the good. Therefore, we must not stop at bribery, deceit, and treachery when they should serve towards the attainment of our end. In politics, one must know how to seize the property of others without hesitation, if by it we secure submission and sovereignty. Our state, marching along the path of peaceful conquest, has the right to replace the horrors of war by less noticeable and more satisfactory sentences of death, necessary to maintain the terror which tends to produce blind submission. Just but merciless severity is the greatest factor of strength in the state, not only for the sake of gain, but also in the name of duty. For the sake of victory, we must keep to a program of violence and make-believe. The doctrine of squaring accounts is precisely as strong as the means of which it makes use. Therefore, it is not so much by the means themselves as by the doctrine of severity that we shall triumph. and bring all governments into subjection to our super government. It is enough for them to know that we are too merciless for all disobedience to cease. Ask Venezuela, ask Syria, ask Iraq. They will dominate and disassemble all nations. We shall end liberty. Far back in ancient times, we were the first to cry among the masses of the people the words liberty, equality, fraternity, words many times repeated since these days by stupid poll parrots who, from all sides around, flew down upon these baits and with them carried away the well-being of the world, true freedom of the individual, formerly so well guarded against the pressure of the mob. The would-be wise men of the Goyim, the intellectuals, could not make anything out of the uttered words in their abstractedness, did not see that in nature there is no equality, cannot be freedom, that nature herself has established inequality of minds, of characters, and capacities, just as immutably as she has established subordination to her laws. Never stop to think that the mob is a blind thing. That upstarts elected from among it to bear rule are, in regard to the political, the same blind men as the mob itself, that the adept, though he be a fool, can yet rule, whereas the non-adept, even if he were a genius, understands nothing in the political. To all those things the Goyim paid no regard. Yet all the time it was based upon these things that dynastic rule rested. The father passed on to the son a knowledge of the course of political affairs in such wise that none should know it but members of the dynasty, and none could betray it to the governed. As time went on, the meaning of the dynastic transference of the true position of affairs in the political was lost, and this aided the success of our cause. In all corners of the earth, the words liberty, equality, fraternity brought to our ranks, thanks to our blind agents, whole legions who bore our banners with enthusiasm. And all the time these words were canker worms at work, boring into the well-being of the Goyim, putting an end everywhere to peace, quiet, solidarity, and destroying all the foundations of the Goya state. As you will see later, this helped us to our triumph. It gave us the possibility, among other things, of getting into our hands the MasterCard, the destruction of the privileges, or in other words, of the very existence of the aristocracy of the Goyim, that class which was the only defense peoples and countries had against us. So the Gentile aristocrats or elite were the only resistance to the plot of the Khazars. On the ruins of the eternal and genealogical aristocracy of the Goyim, we have set up the aristocracy of our educated class, headed by the aristocracy of money. The qualifications for this aristocracy we have established in wealth, which is dependent upon us, and in knowledge, for which our learned elders provide the motive force. Our triumph has been rendered easier by the fact that in our relations with the men whom we wanted, we have always worked upon the most sensitive chords of the human mind, upon the cash accounts, upon the cupidity, upon the insatiability for material needs of men. And each one of these human weaknesses, taken alone, is sufficient to paralyze initiative, for it hands over the will of men to the disposition of him who has bought their activities. The abstraction of freedom has enabled us to persuade the mob in all countries that their government is nothing but the steward of the people who are the owners of the country, and that the steward may be replaced like a worn out glove. It is this possibility of replacing the representatives of the people which has placed at our disposal and, as it were, given us the power of appointment. So they gave you the idea that you can replace your leaders and that that's going to make a difference, when in reality they are the ones appointing their people. And so when you think that Obama is your hero, and while he's in office, he has never done anything for the true Hebrew Israelite or the Negro. But he sure fought hard for gay rights. And then our people still worship him like he's some hero. This is the plot. This is the plan. And there's more power in not voting for these elections than voting. If we all stand down and say we don't vote, right? That's solidarity. That's unity. That's saying we don't play this game anymore. We understand what's going on, right? If you want our vote, it's going to cost you. How much are you willing to give up? How much are you willing to pay us to get our vote, right? Protocol number 2. It is indispensable for our purpose that wars, so far as possible, should not result in territorial gains. War will thus be brought on to the economic ground, where the nations will not fail to perceive in the assistance we give the strength of our predominance, and this state of things will put both sides at the mercy of our international agentures, which possesses millions of eyes ever on the watch and unhampered by any limitations whatsoever. Our international rights will then wipe out national rights in the proper sense of right, and will rule the nations precisely as the civil law of the states rules the relations of their subjects among themselves. The administrators, whom we shall choose from among the public, with the strict regard to their capacities for servile obedience, will not be persons trained in the arts of government, and will therefore easily become pawns in our game in the hands of men of learning and genius, who will be their advisors. Specialists bred and reared from early childhood to rule the affairs of the whole world. So Zygmunt Brzezinski, right? These political advisors, those type of guys. Kissinger, this is who they're talking about. As is well known to you, these specialists of ours have been drawing to fit them for rule the information they need from our political plans, from the lessons of history, from the observations made of the events of every moment as it passes. The Goyim are not guided by practical use of unprejudiced historical observation, but by theoretical routine without any critical regard for the consequent results. We need not therefore take any account of them. Let them amuse themselves until the hour strikes, or live on hopes of new forms of enterprising pastime, or on the memories of all they have enjoyed. For them let that play the principal part which we have persuaded them to accept as the dictates of science or theory. It is with this object in view that we are constantly, by means of our press, arousing a blind confidence in these theories. The intellectuals of the Goyim will puff themselves up with their knowledge, and without any logical verification of them will put into effect all the information available from science, which our agentur specialists have cunningly pieced together for the purpose of educating their minds in the direction we want. Destructive education. Do not suppose for a moment that these statements are empty words. Think carefully of the successes we arranged for Darwinism, Marxism, Nietzscheism. To us Khazars, at any rate, it should be plain to see what a disintegrating importance these directives have had upon the minds of the Goyim. It is indispensable for us to take account of the thoughts, characters, tendencies of the nations in order to avoid making slips in the political and in the direction of the administrative affairs. The triumph of our system, of which the component parts of the machinery may be variously disposed according to the temperament of the peoples met on our way, will fail of success if the practical application of it be not based upon a summing up of the lessons of the past in the light of the present. In the hands of the states of today, there is a great force that creates the movement of thought in the people, and that is the press. The part played by the press is to keep pointing our requirements supposed to be indispensable to give voice to the complaints of the people, to express and to create discontent. It is in the press that the triumph of the freedom of speech finds its incarnation. But the Goyim states have not known how to make use of this force, and it has fallen into our hands. Through the press, we have gained the power to influence while remaining ourselves in the shade. Thanks to the press, we have got the gold in our hands, notwithstanding that we have had to gather it out of the oceans of blood and tears. But it has paid us, though we have sacrificed many of our people. Each victim on our side is worth, in the sight of God, 1,000 Goyim. Protocol number 3. Today, I may tell you that our goal is now only a few steps off. There remains a small space to cross, and the whole long path we have trodden is ready now to close its cycle of the symbolic snake. Remember the snake people? By which we symbolize our people. So they symbolize them by the snake head that eats his tail, like the circle. When this ring closes, all the states of Europe will be locked in its coil as in a powerful vice. The constitution scales of these days will shortly break down, for we have established them with a certain lack of accurate balance in order that they may oscillate incessantly until they wear through the pivot on which they turn. The Goyim are under the impression that they have welded them sufficiently strong, and they have all along kept on expecting that the scales will come into equilibrium. But the pivots, the kings on their thrones, are hemmed in by their representatives who play the fool, distraught with their own uncontrolled and irresponsible power. This power they owe to the terror which has been breathed into the palace. As they have no means of getting at their people into their very midst, the kings on their thrones are no longer able to come to terms with them, and so strengthen themselves against seekers after power. We have made a gulf between the foreseen sovereign power and the blind force of the people, so that both have lost all meaning. For like the blind man and his stick, both are powerless apart. In order to incite seekers after power to a misuse of power, we have set all forces in opposition one to another, breaking up their liberal tendencies toward the independence. To this end, we have stirred up every form of enterprise. We have armed all parties. We have set up authority as a target for every ambition of states. We have made gladiatorial arenas where a lot of confused issues contend. A little more, and disorders and bankruptcy will be universal. Babblers, inexhaustible, have turned into oratorical contests, the sittings of Parliament and administrative boards. Bold journalists and unscrupulous pamphleteers daily fall upon executive officials. Abuses of power will put the final touch in preparing all institutions for their overthrow, and everything will fly skyward under the blows of the maddened mob. Poverty, our weapon. All people are chained down to heavy toil by poverty more firmly than ever. They were chained by slavery and serfdom. From these, one way and another, they might free themselves. These could be settled with, but from want they will never get away. We have included in the Constitution such rights as to the masses appear fictitious and not actual rights. All these so-called people rights can exist only in idea, an idea which can never be realized in practical life. What is it to the proletariat laborer, bowed double over his heavy toil, crushed by his lot in life, if talkers get the right to babble, if journalists get the right to scribble any nonsense side by side with good stuff, once the proletariat has no other profit out of the Constitution save only those pitiful crumbs which we fling them from our table in return for their voting in favor of what we dictate, in favor of the men we place in power, the servants of our agentur. Republican rights for a poor man are no more than a bitter piece of irony, for the necessity he is under of toiling almost all day gives him no present use of them. But the other hand robs him of all guarantee of regular and certain earning by making him dependent on strikes by his comrades or lockouts by his masters. We support communism. The people under our guidance have annihilated the aristocracy who were their one and only defense and foster mother for the sake of their own advantage, which is inseparably bound up with the well-being of the people. Nowadays, with the destruction of the aristocracy, the people have fallen into the grips of merciless, money-grinding scoundrels who have laid a pitiless and cruel yoke upon the necks of the workers. We appear on the scene as alleged saviors of the worker from this oppression when we propose to him to enter the ranks of our fighting forces, socialists, anarchists, communists, to whom we always give support in accordance with an alleged brotherly rule of the solidarity of all human beings, of our social masonry. The aristocracy, which enjoyed by law the labor of the workers, was interested in seeing that the workers were well fed, healthy, and strong. We are interested in just the opposite. In the diminution, the killing out of the goyim, our power is in the chronic shortness of food and physical weakness of the worker, because by all that this implies, he is made the slave of our will, and he will not find in his own authorities either strength or energy to set against our will. Hunger creates the right of capital to rule the worker more surely than it was given to the aristocracy by the legal authority of kings. By what the envy and hatred which is engendered, we shall move the mobs, and with their hands we shall wipe out all those who hinder us on our way. When the hour strikes for our sovereign Lord of all the world to be crowned, it is these same hands which will sweep away everything that might be a hindrance thereto. The goyim have lost the habit of thinking unless prompted by the suggestions of our specialists. Therefore, they do not see the urgent necessity of what we, when our kingdom comes, shall adapt at once, namely this, that it is essential to teach in national schools one simple truth, peace of knowledge. the basis of all knowledge, the knowledge of the structure of human life, of social existence, which requires division of labor, and consequently the division of men into classes and conditions, it is essential for all to know that owing to difference in the objects of human activity, there cannot be any equality, that he who by any act of his compromises a whole class cannot be equally responsible before the law with him who affects no one but only his own honor. The true knowledge of the structure of society, into the secrets of which we do not admit the going, would demonstrate to all men that the positions and work must be kept within a certain circle, that they may not become a source of human suffering, arising from an education which does not correspond with the work which individuals are called upon to do. After a thorough study of this knowledge, the peoples will voluntarily submit to authority and accept such position as is appointed them in the state. In the present state of knowledge and the direction we have given to its development of the people, blindly believing things in print, cherishes, thanks to promptings intended to mislead, and to its own ignorance, a blind hatred toward all conditions which it considers above itself, but it has no understanding of the meaning of class and condition. Jews, or Khazars, will be safe. This hatred will be still further magnified by the effects of an economic crisis which will stop dealing on the exchanges and bring industry to a standstill. We shall create, by all the secret subterranean methods open to us, and with the aid of gold, which is all in our hands, a universal economic crisis whereby we shall throw upon the streets whole mobs of workers simultaneously in all the countries of Europe. These mobs will rush delightedly to shed the blood of those whom, in the simplicity of their ignorance, they have envied from their cradles, and whose property they will then be able to loot. Ours they will not touch, because the moment of attack will be known to us, and we shall take measures to protect our own. We have demonstrated that progress will bring all the Goyim to the sovereignty of reason. Our despotism will be precisely that, for it will know how, by wise severities, to pacificate all unrest, to cauterize liberalism out of all institutions. When the populace has seen that all sorts of concessions and indulgences are yielded it, in the same name of freedom, it has imagined itself to be sovereign lord and has stormed its way to power. But naturally, like every other blind man, it has come upon a host of stumbling blocks. It has rushed to find a guide. It has never had the sense to return to the former state, and it has laid down its plenipotentiary powers at our feet. Remember the French Revolution, to which it was we who gave the name of great. The secrets of its preparations are well known to us, for it was wholly the work of our hands. Ever since that time we have been leading the peoples from one disenchantment to another, so that in the end they should turn also from us in favor of the king despot of the blood of Zion, whom we are preparing for the world. So they're preparing the world for the Antichrist, right? At the present day, we are, as an international force, invincible, because if attacked by some, we are supported by other states. It is the bottomless rascality of the Goyim people, who crawl on their beliefs to force, but are merciless toward weakness, unsparing to faults, and indulgent to crimes, unwilling to bear the contradictions of a free social system, but patient unto martyrdom under the violence of a bold despotism. It is those qualities which are aiding us to independence. From the premier dictators of the present day, the Goyim people suffer patiently and bear such abuses as for the least of them they would have beheaded 20 kings. What is the explanation of this phenomenon? This curious inconsequence of the masses of peoples in their attitude towards what would appear to be events of the same order. It is explained by the fact that these dictators whisper to the peoples through their agents that through these abuses they are inflicting injury on the states with the highest purpose, to secure the welfare of the peoples, the international brotherhood of them all, their solidarity and equality of rights. Naturally, they do not tell the people that this unification must be accomplished only under our sovereign rule. And thus the people condemn the upright and acquit the guilty, persuaded ever more and more that it can do whatever so it wishes. Thanks to this state of things, the people are destroying every kind of stability and creating disorders at every step. The word freedom brings out the communities of men to fight against every kind of force, against every kind of authority, even against God and the laws of nature. For this reason, when we come into our kingdom, shall have to erase this word from the lexicon of life, as implying a principle of brute force which turns mobs into bloodthirsty beasts. These beasts, it is true, fall asleep again every time when they have drunk their fill of blood, and at such time can easily be riveted into their chains. But if they be not given blood, they will not sleep and continue to struggle. Protocol number 4. Every republic passes through several stages. The first of these is comprised in the early days of mad raging by the blind mob, tossed hither and thither, right and left. The second is demagogy, from which is born anarchy, and that leads inevitably to despotism, not any longer legal and overt, and therefore responsible despotism, but to unseen and secretly hidden, yet nevertheless sensibly felt despotism in the hands of some secret organization or other, whose acts are the more unscrupulous, inasmuch as it works behind a screen, behind the backs of all sorts of agents, the changing of whom not only does not injuriously affect, but actually aids the secret force by saving it, thanks to continual changes from the necessity of expanding its resources on the rewarding of long services. Who and what is in a position to overthrow an invisible force? And this is precisely what our force is. Gentile masonry blindly serves as a screen for us and our objects, but the plan of action of our force, even its very abiding place, remains for the whole people an unknown mystery. We shall destroy God, but even freedom might be harmless and have its place in the state economy without injury to the well-being of the peoples if it is rested upon the foundation of faith in God, upon the brotherhood of humanity, unconnected with the conception of equality, which is negatived by the very laws of humanity, and unconnected with by the very laws of creation, for they have established subordination. With such a fate as this, a people might be governed by a wardship of parishes, and would walk contentedly and humbly under the guiding hand of a spiritual pastor, submitting to the dispositions of God upon earth. This is the reason why it is indispensable for us to undermine all faith, to tear out of the mind of the Goyim the very principle of Godhead and the Spirit, and to put in its place arithmetical calculations and material needs. Science is God. Trust science. That's what they all say today, right? Everything is happening as they say. In order to give the Goyim no time to think and take note, their minds must be diverted towards industry and trade. That's what's happening, right? Thus, all the nations will be swallowed up in the pursuit of gain, and in the race for it will not take note of their common foe. But again, in order that freedom may once for all be disintegrated and ruin the communities of the Goyim, we must put industry on a speculative basis. The result of this will be that what is withdrawn from the land by industry will slip through the hands and pass into speculation, that is, to our classes. The intensified struggle for superiority and shocks delivered to economic life will create, nay, have already created, disenchanted, cold, heartless communities. Ever heard of Yellow Jackets in France? Such communities will foster a strong aversion toward the higher political and toward religion. Their only guide is gain, that is gold, which they will erect into a veritable cult for the sake of those material delights which it can give. Then will the hour strike when not for the sake of attaining the good, not even to win wealth, but solely out of the hatred toward the privileged. The lower classes of the Goyim will follow our lead against our rivals for power, the intellectuals of the Goyim. I'm going to stop there. We'll pick up again with protocol number 5. So this world government you've been hearing about, they had it all documented. This is an ancient plan, right, by Esau to rule the world. And God is always angry with Esau. Why? Because he's always plotting. So, peace and blessings, Israel. Your captivity is ending.